So here's something we hardly think about. Does South Africa have a role in mitigating the spread of COVID-19 across the African continent? That's the question from a report on the repatriation of citizens from South Africa. To unpack this report further, we are joined by Strategic Analytics and Management CEO Rita Sonko. Rita, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me. And I say, does South Africa have a role in mitigating? That's part of the question. The bigger part of the question is, does South Africa have a role in terms of the repatriation of people from other countries on the African continent, and subsequently the spread of the virus from its epicenter on the African continent, being South Africa, to countries that had few cases? What have you observed?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I think it's very important that South Africa plays a strong role in this particular instance, because as you know, as you rightly say, the epidemic epicenter on the continent is right here in South Africa. And as citizens have started moving back to their countries, several countries suffered a number of people being really stranded on the streets in South Africa, and now starting to move back home. And we've seen a sharp rise in the epidemic in those countries. And that raises concerns. And of course, South Africa has a role to play, because we have many missions here for all those countries, and we can coordinate better to make sure that we don't repatriate infected people.
Share with us the data you found. I mean, you were interacting with several countries and their representatives here in South Africa, trying to gauge as they started repatriations of their nationals in the midst of the South African lockdown. You were able to then collate data from a number of countries, including countries such as Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Botswana, for example.
Yes, absolutely. So we looked at the data that's available publicly and did this analysis, and found that actually a country like Malawi went from very few infections to 30-fold increase in the number of infections that they have. And I'm looking here at Zimbabwe, went from nearly 0 infections to 18 times the number of infections that they have. So it's really a significant jump in a multifold increase in the number of infections in these countries. And that was the initial period of the repatriation. We're seeing a much more escalation since then, and therefore, again, raising the issue that this is something that South Africa needs to step in and support. And some countries have been in a better position to do something about this, others in this position because they're not as well equipped and not as well funded. So this is something that I suppose the Department of International Relations perhaps and partnering with other NGOs and other international agencies could support, and maybe SADC as well come into that situation.
And the example you give of Malawi is that there were about 1,000 Malawians that were repatriated from South Africa, and of those, about 134 actually tested positive. And that's a significant amount of people, given the historic context of why people come to South Africa to find work, that history of the migrant labor system and how it relates to families and communities that people return home to in their home countries.
Yes, absolutely. And as we know, this is the situation in many countries of Southern Africa, where many people come to South Africa for livelihoods and depend, on that income and be able to go back home and support their families. So the fact that many of these went back and had these infections, and therefore obviously then put their families at risk, is a big concern. And of course, in these countries as well, many of the countries would struggle with ability to contain an infection that is escalating at a high rate. So one would really want to make sure we prevent that kind of situation.
So Rita, you argue that South Africa can't afford to take a position that says, well, if they test positive in their home countries, they become the problem of their governments in those countries. Why is that? You say that actually this continues to be a problem that South Africa should be seized with, and that South Africa should play a role in resolving some of these issues and talking to issues about border security in South Africa.
Absolutely. As you know, firstly, we want to open our borders in order to increase our trade and get back to normal. So economy of the continent is really, really vital for us to start to uplift. And to be able to do that, we need to be able to open the borders. We need to be able to trade more freely. And to do that, you need people to move back and forth between the countries. So if you have a situation where one country is unable to control the epidemic, obviously, if you control things over here in South Africa, but in time start to import now, reverse export of those infections coming back into South Africa because that country failed to control the situation, then we still have a problem on our hands. And so your whole transport routes from all those countries back into the countries to South Africa becomes, at risk. And so South Africa, to open up for trade, means that we actually need to take a proactive approach to supporting the other countries too, so that it's safe. If it's not safe for anyone, it's not safe for everyone, basically.
All right, thank you for your insights there. That's Rita Sonko sharing some insights there that they found about the spread of COVID-19 as at the point at which a number of Southern African countries started repatriating their citizens who were stranded in South Africa during the time of the lockdown. Many of them, of course, having lost their livelihoods because of the lockdown. Let's move on.